Imagine living in a world where cops can live stream your humiliation, rack up views like it's TikTok, and still walk free. Now imagine what happens when someone flips the script and cancels them for good. Sit tight, fellas, cause this is war. Welcome to today's story. Tell me in the comments, what time is it, and which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Main Street was alive with its usual rhythm. Traffic rolling past, store signs buzzing faintly, clusters of teenagers loitering by the diner, and vendors hawking hot dogs near the corner. On the surface, it was just another ordinary afternoon in a quiet American town. But then, like a sudden shift in the air, the ordinary shattered. Officer Griggs stood in the middle of it all, thick around the waist but broad-shouldered. His uniform looked more like armor than work clothes. His badge gleamed, polished bright, but it wasn't duty that kept it shining. It was ego. Everyone in town knew him. Some feared him. Some hated him. Few dared to cross him. And right now, his attention had locked onto a young woman with chestnut hair tied back in a fraying ribbon. Lacey. She couldn't have been more than 19. Slim, bookish, and far too timid for the attention she just caught. Griggs's voice cut across the street like a whip. "Hey, sweetheart. Were you running off to so quick?" Lacey froze. People around her slowed too, sensing trouble. Griggs had that effect. His presence warped the air, made everyone uneasy. I'm just going home," she said softly, clutching the strap of her bag tighter. Griggs grinned, showing teeth. "Don't be shy. Let me see what the boys are missing." Before anyone could react, his hand shot forward. With a smirk curling at his lips, he yanked up the hem of her skirt right there on Main Street. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Lacey's face turned scarlet. She dropped her bag as she grabbed desperately at her clothes, trying to pull them back down. Griggs chuckled, loud and cruel. "That's more like it." Phones came out. A couple of bystanders filmed, whispering nervously, but no one stepped forward. That was the power of the badge. Griggs knew it, wore it like a crown. "You'll remember this corner every damn day," he sneered, leaning close enough for her to smell the tobacco on his breath. And then, a voice sliced the air clean in half. "Put your hands on her again, and you'll eat through a straw for the rest of your life." The crowd shifted. Heads turned. Naomi stepped out from the curb. She wasn't polished. Her jeans were worn, her t-shirt faded, her boots scuffed. But there was a sharpness in her gaze that made people instinctively move aside. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing a jawline set like steel. She walked like she knew how to fight and had no problem proving it. Griggs straightened, scoffing. "Oh, here we go. Another loud mouth who doesn't know when to shut up." Naomi didn't slow her pace. "I said let her go. You don't give orders to me." He tapped his badge. This means I run this street." Naomi tilted her head. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Funny. From here, it looks like all you're running is your mouth." The crowd chuckled nervously. Even Lacey, wide-eyed and shaking, caught a flicker of hope in Naomi's tone. Griggs's smile vanished. He stepped toward Naomi, squaring his shoulders. "Lady, I'll lock you up so fast your head'll spin." Naomi dropped her bag onto the pavement with a deliberate thud. Her voice lowered, calm but dangerous. "You'd better call backup then, because I'm about to make this real embarrassing for you." For the first time, doubt flickered across Griggs's face. But pride, his biggest weakness, pushed it away. He swung his nightstick free from his belt, letting it whistle through the air. "Last warning." Naomi smirked. "This is mine." In a blur, she lunged. Her fist drove straight into his throat. Griggs's eyes bulged as he staggered backward, choking for air. The nightstick slipped from his grasp. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Holy sh!" Another phone camera zoomed closer. Before Griggs could recover, Naomi grabbed his collar and slammed him against the hood of his own patrol car. The sound rang out, metal against bone. "You feel big now?" she hissed. Griggs sputtered, tried to twist free, but Naomi was quicker. She wrenched his arm behind his back until his knees buckled. The crowd exploded into shouts, some cheering, some screaming for order. Lacey backed away, tears streaming, but her lips trembling into something that looked like relief. Naomi leaned down, her voice sharp as a blade. This is what happens when you mistake a badge for power. And then, with one final shove, she threw him to the ground. Phones captured every second. The image would spread within hours. Officer Griggs, the town's untouchable bully, sprawled face-first on Main Street, humiliated by the woman who dared to defy him. And in that moment, with the world watching, the balance of power shifted. Lacey hadn't slept. Not really. She crawled into bed hours earlier, still trembling from what happened on Main Street. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Griggs's grin, the smug curl of his lips when he lifted her skirt. But alongside, it was Naomi, the woman who had appeared like a storm out of nowhere and turned the scene upside down. Lacey sat up in the dark, her phone glowing in her hands. Notifications poured in, one after another. At first she thought it was a mistake. Then she tapped a video. There she was, frozen, humiliated, clutching at her clothes. And then, Naomi, fierce and unflinching, taking Griggs apart in front of the whole street. The clip ended with Griggs sprawled on the pavement. The caption read, "Cop gets served street justice after assaulting girl in broad daylight." Views, 2.3 million. Lacey's breath caught. She scrolled. Another video, then another. Different angles, different captions, each with thousands of comments. Protect this woman at all costs. Griggs finally got what he deserved. Who's the girl? She looks terrified. This is bigger than one cop. This is what happens when power goes unchecked. Lacey's hand shook as she set the phone down. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want to be anyone's symbol. She just wanted to forget. But the internet didn't forget. And the longer she stared at those comments, the more something inside her shifted. Fear gave way to fury. She whispered into the silence of her room, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. No, he doesn't get to do this to me. Not to anyone. By morning, reporters were on her front lawn. Her mother, frazzled and red-eyed, tried to shoo them away, but their microphones pushed forward like weapons. Lacey, do you want to make a statement? Did Officer Griggs have a history of harassing you? Are you pressing charges? Lacey clutched her hoodie tighter and kept walking, her heart racing, but her eyes didn't drop. Not this time. Get off our property, her mother snapped, but Lacey paused. She turned, just for a moment, and faced the cameras. I'm not staying quiet, she said, her voice small but firm. He used his badge to humiliate me. If you think this was the first time he's done something like this, you're lying to yourself. Gasps, flashes, and then silence before the frenzy returned. Her words hit the evening news before dinner. Meanwhile, Naomi was in her tiny kitchen, stirring a pot of rice, when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She wasn't much for screens, but the calls and texts were impossible to ignore. Naomi, you're everywhere, one friend said over the phone. You're trending, girl. They're calling you a vigilante hero. Naomi pinched the bridge of her nose. Hero? Please. I did what anybody with a spine should have done. Yeah, but nobody else did. That's the point. You embarrassed him. People are saying you're some kind of street justice angel. Naomi laughed dryly. Street justice angel? I'm just a woman who got sick of watching bullies in uniforms. But even as she said it, a heaviness pressed on her chest. She didn't like the spotlight. She didn't trust it. In her experience, attention could be just as dangerous as silence. Still, she opened one of the clips. She watched herself, fists flying, Griggs crumpling, the crowd cheering. The comments were endless. Some called her a hero. Others called her dangerous. A few demanded her arrest. Naomi set the phone down and muttered, "Damn it. This ain't good." That night, Lacey and Naomi met again. Not by design, by collision. Lacey had gone to a local cafe, reporters trailing her. Naomi was there already, sipping coffee in the corner. When Lacey spotted her, she froze. Then, without thinking, she crossed the room. Naomi sighed. You shouldn't be here with them watching. I don't care, Lacey shot back. Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with determination. You saved me, and now everyone knows. I'm not hiding anymore. Naomi studied her, seeing not the fragile girl from yesterday, but someone finding her fire. She leaned back, smirking faintly. You sure about that? Spotlight burns hot, and once you step into it, you don't get to walk out easy. Lacey swallowed, then nodded. I'd rather burn than stay silent. For the first time, Naomi's guarded expression softened. She raised her coffee in a mock toast. Guess the world just found its loudest quiet girl. And outside the cafe window, cameras flashed, capturing a new image. Not just a humiliated girl or a lone fighter, but two women, unlikely allies, standing on the edge of a storm neither of them could yet imagine. Officer Griggs sat in the locker room, shirt unbuttoned, his chest heaving with rage. His face was still red where Naomi had slammed him against the hood of his own patrol car. Every time he blinked, he saw the phones, the cameras, the smirks on people's faces. The humiliation was worse than the bruises. She made me look weak, he spat, slamming his fist into a metal locker. The clang echoed down the empty corridor. From the corner, Officer Mills looked up from lacing his boots. Older, heavier, with a crooked nose that never healed right. Mills had been through enough scandals to know when the walls were closing in. Calm down, Griggs. You let it eat at you, she wins. She's not going to win, Griggs growled. Not some street rat who thinks she can put her hands on me. You know what happens when a cop goes down like that? People stop respecting the badge. And if they stop respecting it, his eyes burned. They stop fearing it. Mills leaned back, chewing his gum slowly. Fear's the only thing keeping this town in line. Griggs nodded. Exactly. Which is why we're not letting this stand. Upstairs, in the chief's office, blinds were drawn tight. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, though no one had lit one in years. Old habits. Chief Danner, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel, tossed a folder onto his desk. The folder was thin, too thin for the weight it carried. Complaints, he said flatly. Half a dozen women. A couple of bar fights. And now this circus on Main Street. Captain Ross, sitting stiffly in the chair opposite, didn't blink. None of it stuck. Internal affairs buried the rest. And what about this Naomi woman? The chief asked. The internet's painting her as a damn hero. Ross smirked, cold and dismissive. Heroes don't last long when the Brotherhood closes ranks. We'll dig up something, an old record, a bad debt, whatever we need to drag her name through the mud. Nobody remembers the truth once the headlines turn. The chief leaned back, his chair groaning. And the girl, Lacey, she'll get tired. They always do. Little thing like that won't hold up once the threats start coming. A silence stretched, heavy and sharp. The chief finally exhaled. Do it. Quietly. We can't afford cracks in the wall. Meanwhile, Naomi was back in her apartment, pacing. She wasn't afraid of Griggs. She'd dealt with men like him all her life. What rattled her was the sudden attention. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Requests for interviews, strangers thanking her, others warning her. She ignored most of it, but one message caught her eye. It was from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Careful. You didn't just embarrass a cop. You embarrassed the system. They'll come for you harder than you think. Naomi sat down heavily, staring at the words. She thought about the look in Griggs's eyes after she hit him. The way it shifted from shock to hatred, like a fire waiting to burn her alive. She thought about the crowd cheering, about Lacey standing taller than she had before. And she thought about the badge. That tiny piece of metal that men like Griggs used to shield every dirty secret. For the first time, she understood she hadn't just taken down a man. She'd cracked the shell around a machine. At the precinct that night, Griggs sat in a circle of his fellow officers. Beer cans sweated on the table, laughter masking the undercurrent of unease. They're laughing at us, Griggs said, slamming his palm on the table. At me, and by extension, at every one of you. A younger officer shifted nervously. People are saying she just defended the girl. Maybe nothing, Mills cut in sharply. His eyes pinned the rookie until he shut his mouth. Griggs leaned forward, his voice low, venomous. This is about respect. About power. That woman thinks she embarrassed me. She embarrassed all of us. And if we let that slide, what's next? Every punk on the street thinks they can swing at a cop and walk away. The table went quiet. Then Mills raised his can. Brotherhood. The others followed. Brotherhood. Griggs clinked his can against theirs, a thin smile creeping back onto his face. Good. Then we know what we have to do. Across town, Naomi stood on her balcony, the night air cool against her skin. She lit a cigarette, staring out over the quiet streets. But her gut told her the quiet wouldn't last. For every cheer in the crowd, for every message calling her a hero, there was a shadow moving against her. She could feel it. And deep down, Naomi knew this wasn't just about one fight. This was about a war she hadn't meant to start. But now that it had begun, there was no way back. Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, elbows on her knees, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. The news blared from the small TV in the corner, her own face frozen mid-swing as the anchor's voice ran over the footage. She muted it. She didn't need to hear their version. She knew who she was. And so did this town. They called her unpredictable, dangerous, a woman with a temper too sharp to dull. But underneath all that, there was something else, a reputation stitched from years of fighting back when she wasn't supposed to. Naomi grew up on the South Side, in a two-room house with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who disappeared before she could spell his name. Trouble found her early. Men twice her size tried to intimidate her. Teachers wrote her off. By 16, she was in fights more often than classrooms. But the one that branded her forever was the night she broke a man's jaw. He was 30. She was barely 17. He cornered her outside a party, reeking of beer, his hands grabbing where they didn't belong. She warned him. Twice. When he didn't stop, she picked up a brick from the curb and swung until his face collapsed. The cops called it assault. Naomi called it survival. A year later, she sat in county jail, the orange jumpsuit heavy on her shoulders, her future stamped with a record. She remembered the stares, the whispers from other inmates. Some gave her space. Others nodded at her with respect. Even in chains, Naomi didn't bow her head. By the time she got out, she wasn't just another girl from the South Side. She was the girl who wouldn't break. Now, years later, that reputation still clung to her. Walking through her neighborhood meant hearing both sides. Old women muttering, "There goes trouble," under their breath, while teenagers whispered, "She's the one who stood up to Griggs." Respect and fear tangled together. At the corner store, an older man named Henry leaned across the counter when she came in. His voice was low, careful. "You really stir the pot, Naomi." She tossed a loaf of bread on the counter. Didn't plan on it. Henry eyed her. That's the problem. The kind of men you just humiliated, they don't forget. They don't forgive. Naomi's smirk was faint but steady. Good thing I don't scare easy. Henry sighed, shaking his head. Yeah, but there's a difference between not being scared and not knowing when you're being hunted. That night, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at the small stack of letters she kept tucked in an old shoebox. They were from her mother, letters she wrote while Naomi was locked up. Her mother always said the same thing in different ways. "I raised you to be strong, but strength without wisdom is just another kind of cage." Naomi traced the words with her finger. She knew her mother was right. But wisdom had never saved her when fists flew. Wisdom had never stopped men like Griggs. Only fight did. She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling and muttered, "This time's different." Because this wasn't just about her anymore. Not about her reputation or her pride. When she slammed Griggs against that patrol car, she hadn't just defended Lacey. She'd cracked something open in the whole town. People were watching. Some cheering. Some plotting. But all watching. And for the first time in years, Naomi felt something bigger than survival. Responsibility. At a bar on the outskirts of town, whispers of Naomi's past spread like wildfire. She's been locked up before. Didn't she nearly kill a guy with a brick? Yeah, but didn't you see her take down Griggs? That wasn't luck. That was a woman who's been through it. The stories grew, twisted, exaggerated. Some painted her as a menace. Others as a legend. Back in her apartment, Naomi shut off her phone and stood at the window. The streetlights flickered against the dark, casting long shadows. She could feel it in her bones. The game she'd stepped into wasn't just about Griggs. It was about every dirty cop who thought the badge made him untouchable. Every person who thought silence kept them safe. Her past had made her a fighter. Her present was forcing her into something more. Naomi clenched her jaw, whispered into the empty room. They wanted trouble. Now they've got me. And in the stillness of the night, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The morning after the cafe meeting, Naomi woke to a pounding on her door. She cursed under her breath, pulled on a hoodie, and yanked it open. Two reporters shoved microphones toward her face before she could blink. Naomi, do you have any comment on the video? Are you aware you've become a symbol of resistance against police corruption? Behind them, cameras flashed like fireworks. Naomi slammed the door shut. Symbol my ass. She pressed her forehead to the cool wood, breathing hard. She wasn't built for microphones or headlines. She was built for fists for survival. But somehow, the world had dragged her into a spotlight she never wanted. Lacey wasn't faring much better. At her mother's house, activists had set up camp outside the lawn, waving signs that read justice for Lacey and end police abuse. Some looked sincere, others looked hungry for their slice of fame. When she stepped outside, a woman in a bright red coat cornered her. "Sweetheart, I'm running for city council," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "With your story and my platform, we could change this town." Lacey blinked. "Are you trying to help me or help yourself?" The woman's smile tightened. "Does it matter as long as change happens?" Lacey didn't answer. She just turned back inside, slamming the door. Later that day, Naomi and Lacey sat in a quiet diner booth, trying to carve out a space untouched by flashing lights. But even here, people stole glances, whispered. "Feels like we're animals in a zoo," Lacey muttered, stirring her coffee. Naomi smirked. "At least animals don't get asked for interviews." They shared a laugh, but it faded quickly when a man slid into their booth uninvited. Sharp suit, greasy charm. "Ladies," he said smoothly. "Name's Victor. I'm a lawyer. I think you could use my services." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "We didn't ask for a lawyer." "No, but you need one," Victor said, folding his hands. "The department is circling the wagons. They'll smear you, Naomi. Dig up your past. As for you, Lacey, they'll drag your name through the mud until you regret ever speaking up. I can protect you." Lacey hesitated, but Naomi cut in. "And what's your price?" Victor's smile widened, thin and oily. "Let's just say favors. When the time is right." Naomi leaned forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We're not for sale. Find another meal ticket." Victor's grin faltered, but only for a second. "Suit yourself. But when the wolves come, don't say I didn't offer you teeth." He slid out of the booth, leaving behind the faint smell of cologne and corruption. Naomi watched him leave, muttering, "Vultures, every damn one of them." That night, in a cramped newsroom across town, journalist Daniel Cruz hunched over his desk, eyes glued to files spread across it. He wasn't chasing a headline. He was chasing blood. Cruz had been digging into Officer Griggs for months, long before the viral video. He'd filed FOIA requests, chased whispers from barflies and ex-cons, hit wall after wall. But now, with the world finally paying attention, the walls had cracks. He flipped through a folder marked confidential. Bank statements, phone records, and then names. Names tied to men far above Griggs's pay grade. Daniel leaned back, heart racing. Griggs wasn't just a dirty cop who abused women on the street. He was tied to an organized crime ring that ran half the illegal gambling and drug trade in the county. And the kicker? Some of his biggest protectors were wearing suits inside City Hall. Daniel exhaled. This story wasn't just about a cop gone bad. It was about a machine of corruption hidden behind the badge and the brotherhood. Back at her apartment, Naomi's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "They're going to bury you. Don't trust anyone who offers help, especially not the lawyer." Naomi frowned, tossing the phone onto the couch. She didn't scare easy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that bigger hands were already moving the pieces around her. She lit another cigarette, staring into the dark. "They think I'm a pawn," she whispered. "Guess it's time they find out I'm not playing their game." And across town, Daniel Cruz typed the first line of his expose. "Officer Griggs isn't just a cop. He's the bridge between law enforcement and organized crime. And his downfall may expose an empire." The storm was no longer brewing. It had already arrived. Naomi knew the game had changed the moment she spotted the black sedan in her rearview mirror. It wasn't subtle. No tinted windows, no attempt at blending in. Just a slow, deliberate shadow that trailed her every turn. At first, she ignored it. She'd been watched before. But when the same car showed up outside her apartment at 2 in the morning, engine idling, headlights slicing through her blinds, she felt the knot in her gut tighten. She cracked her window and shouted into the night. "You think I'm scared? Keep watching. I don't blink." The car didn't move. Across town, Lacey's family felt the bite too. Her younger brother, barely 15, came home with a split lip after a run-in with cops who claimed he fit the description. Their mailbox was smashed, their tires slashed. And worse, anonymous calls filled the house at night. Heavy breathing, followed by silence. Her mother sat on the couch, clutching the phone, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They're trying to break us, Lacey." But Lacey, eyes blazing, shook her head. "No, Mama, they're trying to shut me up, and I'm not going to let them." The streets themselves became a battleground. Protesters flooded Main Street, chanting Lacey's name, waving signs painted with Naomi's face. They shouted for justice, for accountability, for someone to finally pay. Across from them, police in riot gear lined up like an iron wall, shields gleaming under the streetlights. The first shove came from nowhere. A bottle smashed against a shield. Then smoke filled the air. Screams ripped through the crowd as batons swung and protesters pushed back. "Get down," someone shouted. Naomi grabbed Lacey, pulling her into the shelter of a doorway as chaos erupted around them. Tear gas hissed. Sirens wailed. The line between neighbor and enemy blurred in the haze. From their cover, Naomi watched as a man she recognized. Henry, the store owner who'd warned her, was thrown to the pavement by 2 officers. He was old, unarmed, coughing into the concrete. Naomi's fists clenched. "This isn't policing," she muttered. "This is war." Later, as the streets emptied, the silence was heavier than the violence. Burned trash cans smoldered on the sidewalks. Windows shattered. The smell of smoke clung to the air. Naomi and Lacey sat on the steps of the diner, their faces lit by the glow of distant flames. Lacey's voice trembled. "I didn't ask for any of this." Naomi glanced at her, steady as stone. "None of us did. But now it's here." She tapped her chest. "This isn't about surviving anymore. It's about tearing that mask off their faces, showing everyone what power really looks like when it's cornered." Lacey looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "And what if they kill us before we can?" Naomi leaned closer, her voice low but fierce. "Then we make sure the world sees it, and they'll never be able to hide again." Meanwhile, inside the police station, Griggs seethed. His jaw still ached from Naomi's fist, his pride shredded in public. But it wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about control. "They think they can embarrass me?" he barked, slamming his fist on the table. "They don't know who they're dealing with." His fellow officers, some silent, some nodding, closed ranks around him. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about the brotherhood. Protect one of their own, no matter the cost. Griggs leaned back, a cruel smile stretching across his face. "She wants a fight? Let's see how long she lasts when the whole damn town turns on her." Back in her apartment, Naomi sat by the window, watching the same black sedan idle on the corner. She didn't bother closing the blinds this time. She wanted them to see her watching back. She lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. "They think fear is a weapon," she whispered to herself. "But fear's only power if you let it live inside you." Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Cruz, the journalist digging into Griggs. "Naomi, I found something. Meet me tomorrow. It's bigger than you think." Naomi stubbed out her cigarette, her eyes narrowing. The fight wasn't just in the streets anymore. It was in the shadows, in the secrets waiting to be dragged into the light. And if Griggs wanted war, Naomi was ready to burn the mask off every last one of them. Naomi always felt the shift before it landed. The strange silence on the block, the eyes that lingered too long, the way the air felt heavy, like a storm about to break. She was walking home from the corner store, a bag of groceries slung over her arm, when she noticed the patrol car parked at the end of the street. Engine idling. No sirens, no lights. Just waiting. She kept moving, pretending not to notice. But she knew better. "Here we go," she muttered under her breath. The trap was clean, professional. Griggs had thought it through. On the corner by her building, two young men she'd never seen before started shouting at each other, loud enough to draw attention. One shoved the other. The other shoved back. Groceries hit the sidewalk as Naomi stepped in, instinct kicking in. "Hey, cut that out," she barked, pulling one back by the arm. That's when the first punch was thrown, not at each other, but at her. A glancing blow to her shoulder. Naomi staggered, surprised, before her reflexes snapped into gear. She shoved the guy away, grabbed the second by the wrist, twisting until he yelped. And that's when the cops swarmed. For cruisers screeched onto the block, lights blazing. Officers poured out, guns drawn, shouting over one another. "There she is. That's her. Aggressor on scene." Naomi froze, realization hitting her like ice water. This wasn't random. This was scripted, and she was the villain in their play. "Drop him, Naomi. Hands where I can see them." She let go instantly, raising her hands high. This is a setup. You know what, a damn setup. But the cameras were already rolling. Reporters had somehow arrived early. Lenses zoomed in as two cops tackled her to the ground, shoving her cheek against the pavement. The same pavement where Griggs had once knelt on someone else. "Stop resisting," one of them barked, though she wasn't resisting at all. Naomi's voice carried over the chaos. "I see you, Griggs. This is your game." The mugshot was everywhere within hours. Local news led with the headline, "Naomi Johnson arrested in street altercation." Cable pundits debated her like she was a sport, half painted her as a violent thug who had finally shown her true colors. The other half insisted it was a setup, proof of a corrupt department out for blood. But the damage was done. Lacey sat on her couch, fists clenched as she watched the coverage. "They're framing her," she whispered. "They're gonna bury her." Her phone buzzed. It was Daniel Cruz, the journalist. "Don't talk to reporters yet. I've got proof it was staged. Working on it." In her holding cell, Naomi sat on the edge of the cot, hands clasped, staring at the floor. The cold concrete walls pressed in around her, familiar but no less suffocating. She'd been here before, but this time felt different. She wasn't here because of a bar fight or a bad decision. She was here because she dared to expose a man who thought he was untouchable. The cell door clanged open. A guard stepped in. "You made the news again," he said with a smirk. "Folk out there think you're some kind of outlaw." Naomi looked up, eyes like steel. "Good. Maybe it's time they see what happens when the outlaw stops playing nice." Outside, her so-called allies scrambled. Activists drafted press releases. Lawyers debated strategy. The shady lawyer, Victor, resurfaced, offering to fix things for a price. But Naomi's faith in the system was already gone. She could see it clearly now. The courtroom wasn't justice. The news wasn't truth. The badge wasn't protection. It was all theater. And she was the villain in their script. She leaned back against the wall, whispering to herself, "If they want war, I'll bring it." Her fists clenched, not the fists of a victim, but of a fighter who had nothing left to lose. And outside those walls, the streets burned with her name, half shouting for her release, half calling for her head. The trap had been set, but Naomi wasn't planning to stay caught. The courthouse smelled like bleach and fear. Naomi sat at the defense table, her wrists free of cuffs, but her dignity shackled by the weight of every camera pointed her way. Rows of reporters leaned forward, hungry for blood. The air buzzed with whispers. "That's her. The vigilante. The thug." Griggs strutted in, clean-shaven, crisp uniform, the picture of authority. He smirked when his eyes landed on her, tilting his chin as if to remind everyone, "I'm the law. She's the criminal." Naomi rolled her shoulders, whispering to herself, "You'll choke on that smile." The trial moved like molasses. Witnesses who swore they'd testify suddenly disappeared or couldn't be reached. A neighbor who had filmed the setup claimed he'd lost his phone, and the body cam footage, supposedly the nail in the coffin, was reported accidentally erased due to a technical error. The prosecutor shrugged like it was routine. The judge, a heavy-jowled man named Harlan Quinn, barely raised an eyebrow. Naomi leaned toward her attorney, a young woman assigned by the court. "This is rigged," Naomi hissed. The lawyer gave a helpless shrug. "It's the system." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Then burn the system." Lacey sat in the gallery, her hands clenched so tightly they trembled. Every word felt like a blade twisting deeper. She wanted to scream, to leap across the aisle and shout the truth, but the bailiff's eyes pinned her in place. Behind her, activists shifted restlessly, whispering into phones, live tweeting every injustice. But even they looked defeated. It felt like the walls themselves were siding with Griggs. Then came the testimony. A fellow officer took the stand, reciting a rehearsed script about how Naomi had been out of control, violent, and a danger to public safety. His voice was steady, too steady, like a man clinging to a lie. Naomi couldn't hold her tongue. She slammed her hand against the table. "Liar!" The judge banged his gavel. "One more outburst, and you'll be removed from this courtroom." Griggs smirked wider. He leaned back in his chair like a man already tasting victory. But just when the final nail seemed ready to seal her coffin, the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned. A figure stepped inside. Broad shoulders, leather jacket, face weathered by time and regret. Naomi froze. She knew that walk, that presence. "Dante," she whispered. "Dante Rivera, once her closest ally on the streets, until a betrayal split them apart. He had vanished years ago, leaving Naomi to fight battles alone. And now, here he was, swaggering down the aisle with a flash drive clenched in his fist. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. The judge frowned. "And who the hell are you?" Dante's voice boomed. "The ghost you forgot about." He walked straight to the prosecutor's table, ignoring protocol. "You lost your body cam footage, huh? Lucky for you, I don't lose things." Gasps erupted as he dropped the flash drive onto the table with a loud clack. Naomi's pulse hammered. She remembered that night. Dante had been there in the shadows, watching when the cops staged their trap. She had cursed his silence. But he hadn't been silent at all. He'd been recording. The prosecutor stammered, This isn't admissible without." But Dante cut him off, glaring at the cameras. "Tell that to the people watching at home, because I just sent this footage to every damn newsroom in the state." The judge pounded his gavel furiously, shouting for order. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, activists cheering, Lacey covering her mouth in shock. Naomi sat frozen, her eyes locked on Dante. Old betrayal warred with fresh relief. He had saved her, but at what cost? Griggs, pale now, leaned forward, his mask cracking for the first time. His eyes flickered with panic. Naomi leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "How's it feel, Griggs?" she whispered. "When a mask comes off?" The breaking point had arrived, not just for Naomi, but for the entire town. And everyone in that courtroom knew nothing would ever be the same again. The courthouse was no longer a courthouse. It was a powder keg. Outside, thousands filled the streets, their chants rattling the windows. "Justice for Naomi. Justice for us." Signs waved, fists rose, and every camera lens streamed live to millions across the country. Inside, the air was thick with adrenaline. Reporters crowded the aisles, phones buzzing as Dante's leaked footage spread like wildfire. It showed everything. Griggs orchestrating the setup, officers staging the fight, the orders barked like lines in a play. The empire he built on intimidation was unraveling in real time. And yet there he sat, Officer Griggs, the man who thought himself untouchable. His uniform pressed, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered with the panic of a cornered animal. Naomi rose slowly from her seat, the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who'd been silenced, beaten, or buried under his badge. She turned to face him, The room fell into a hush. "Look at you," she said, her voice steady, carrying through the silence. "All that power, all that fear you spread, and now the whole world sees what you really are." Griggs's lips curled into a sneer. "You think this ends me? I've survived worse. The system eats people like you alive." Naomi stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "Not this time. The system can't save you from the truth." Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open. Protesters had forced their way inside, flooding the gallery with chants and shouts. Bailiffs scrambled, judges banged gavels, but it was useless. The courthouse had become the people's stage. And on every phone, every live stream, the showdown was unfolding like the climax of a movie. Naomi didn't flinch. She welcomed the eyes. Griggs stood abruptly, pointing at her. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a criminal." Naomi tilted her head. "If I'm a criminal, what does that make you? Because I don't need a badge to know right from wrong." The crowd roared. Reporters shoved microphones closer. For the first time, Griggs's mask cracked completely. His voice rose, wild and desperate. "You people need me. Without men like me, this town falls apart." "No," Naomi shot back. Her tone was quiet now, but sharper than a blade. "This town falls apart because of men like you." The tension snapped. Griggs lunged across the table, his hand grabbing for Naomi's arm. Gasps erupted as officers rushed forward. But Naomi didn't back down. She twisted free, her fist driving hard into his chest, sending him staggering backward into the arms of his own men. The cameras caught every second. Chaos erupted. Officers shouting, protesters surging, the judge fleeing through his private door. The courtroom became a storm, but the world only saw one image. Officer Griggs, the untouchable, being dragged out in handcuffs as the crowd thundered. Outside, the streets exploded. Fireworks burst above the courthouse. People cried, screamed, hugged strangers. Lacey stood on the courthouse steps, tears streaming down her face, shouting into the cameras, "We did this. Not them, us." Naomi emerged moments later, flanked by activists and allies. She looked exhausted, bruised, but unbroken. Reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved at her, questions firing like bullets. "What's next, Naomi?" She paused, scanning the sea of faces. The same faces that once looked away in silence, now burned with fire. "What's next?" she repeated, her voice carrying over the noise. "What's next is we stop being afraid. We stop letting men like him decide who gets to live free. This fight doesn't end with him, it begins with us." The crowd erupted. The chants grew louder, shaking the very walls of the courthouse. Somewhere in the chaos, Griggs was shoved into the back of a police van, his smirk gone, his eyes hollow. The man who once terrorized the town was now just another prisoner. And for Naomi, standing beneath the glow of street lights and phone screens, it was clear the untouchable had fallen. Not by the system, not by the courts, but by the people who refused to be silent. The smoke cleared, but the scars stayed. Main Street no longer looked like the heart of a quiet town. It looked like the memory of a war zone. Posters still clung to lampposts, faded by rain. Broken glass sparkled on the sidewalks like confetti that had long lost its shine. People walked slower now, cautious, as if afraid the ground might shift beneath them again. And in the middle of it all, Naomi Carter walked alone. Her name had become legend overnight. Some called her a hero, others a menace. Most just whispered it with the awe you give someone who did the thing you were too afraid to do. But Naomi wasn't celebrating. Her knuckles still ached from that final swing. Her nights were restless, haunted by every face that had vanished before she ever got her shot at justice. She wasn't a saint. She never wanted to be. Lacey, though, had found her fire. The once timid girl stood on a stage in the park, a megaphone in hand, her voice strong and steady. "We can't go back to silence. Not after this. We've seen the truth. Now we have to build something better." The crowd applauded, some wiping tears, others nodding like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone younger, braver, to take the mic. Lacey smiled, but it wasn't the same smile she had months ago. The innocence was gone. What replaced it was harder, sharper, unshakable. Naomi watched from the back of the crowd, hood pulled low. Pride stirred in her chest, tangled with sorrow. Lacey was standing tall, but she had paid a price to get there. The police department was crumbling. Investigators had poured in like sharks, smelling blood. Old complaints resurfaced. Names, dates, reports lost in dusty drawers. Griggs's allies scattered, some resigning, others dragged into courtrooms of their own. The thin blue line had cracked wide open. But corruption doesn't die easy. Whispers of new power plays swirled in alleys and bars. Men in suits stepped in where men in uniforms fell out. Naomi knew better than to believe the war was won. On her last night in town, Naomi sat at the diner with Dante. The neon sign outside flickered, buzzing like a tired insect. "You leaving for good?" Dante asked, stirring his coffee but not drinking it. Naomi smirked faintly. "What else is there for me here? Half the people think I saved them. The other half wants me gone. That's no way to live." Dante studied her, his eyes softer than she remembered. "You could stay. Build something with them." Naomi shook her head. "I'm not made for stages and microphones. That's Lacey's world now. Mine's different." For a moment, they sat in silence. The jukebox hummed an old tune no one was listening to. Finally, Dante said, "Wherever you go, don't lose what made you fight." Naomi gave a half smile, sliding out of the booth. "Don't worry. That part of me's permanent." The next morning, the town woke to headlines. Police department under federal investigation. Lacey's speech made the evening news. Griggs's mugshot plastered every channel, his smirk replaced by a hollow stare. But Naomi was already gone. She didn't leave with fanfare. No parades, no speeches. Just a duffel bag over her shoulder, boots hitting the pavement as she walked toward the bus station. A few people spotted her, whispered, pointed. One little girl tugged her mother's sleeve, saying, "That's her." Naomi met the girl's eyes, gave a small nod, then kept walking. The bus doors hissed open. She climbed aboard, sat by the window, and watched as the town grew smaller in the distance. Behind her, she left a legend. Stories would grow, rumors would twist, songs would be written about the woman who stood up when no one else dared. But Naomi knew the truth. She wasn't a savior. She was just a scarred, stubborn woman who refused to bow. And sometimes that was enough to change everything.